The church bells should have sounded like joy, like new beginnings and promises whispered into forever. But on that cold spring morning in a small town in North Carolina, they tolled like warning bells. The air vibrated with anticipation, guests shifting in their seats, a sea of pastel dresses and dark suits waiting for the doors to open and the bride to appear. But behind those doors, hidden from all eyes, Grace Whitmore sat in her wheelchair, staring at the reflections she barely recognized. White satin cascading over knees she could no longer feel, a veil trembling like fragile hope over her curls, and eyes filled not with excitement but with a storm of dread. Her heart thudded painfully, as if it already sensed what her mind refused to believe. That love, her love, might not be strong enough to survive the weight of her broken body. She waited for her groom to come to her, to reassure her, to tell her she was still enough. But instead came the words that would shatter everything. He left. And the world, as she knew it, broke in a single breath. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel to help stories like this reach more people. For a few long seconds after the wedding coordinator delivered the news, Grace couldn't breathe. It felt as though something collapsed inside her, as if the fragile structure she had carefully rebuilt after the accident had been smashed once again. She had survived the crash, a drunk driver who never saw the crossing light change. She had survived the surgeries, the nights of sobbing into her pillow when she realized she couldn't move her legs, the humiliation of relearning ways to exist in a world made for the standing. What she hadn't expected was to lose Daniel, the man she believed would love her the same, wheelchair or not. The man who had once kissed her forehead and promised that nothing would ever change. She had clung to those promises in the darkest hours, believing them as fiercely as she believed in the sun rising each morning. But now, as her bouquet slipped from her trembling hands and scattered white roses across the floor, she realized she was utterly alone. The church grew restless beyond the closed doors. Guests whispered, shifting, murmuring. The music faltered mid-note, and somewhere out there, a child gave a curious little whine, the small, innocent sound piercing the heavy silence like a pin through a balloon. Grace's mother knelt beside her, trying to soothe her, but her words felt distant, muffled, like echoes underwater. All Grace could see in her mind were the hours she spent practicing maneuvering her wheelchair gracefully, the days she sacrificed to physical therapy, the nights she prayed for strength, all of it for this moment, this day, that was now crumbling at her feet. Eventually the doors opened. People turned toward her, not with joy, but shock and awkward pity. Grace couldn't bear the weight of their stares. The wedding coordinator, flustered and unsure, stammered something about a difficult situation and everyone's patience. But the truth spread quickly through the room like wildfire. The groom was gone. The paralyzed bride was abandoned. The wedding was over. Grace wished she could disappear. But just when she felt the world shrinking, a movement in the crowd caught her eye. A tall figure rising slowly to his feet. A man she did not know. Dark-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple suit that looked a little worn, as if he hadn't bought it for this occasion, but was doing his best. Beside him stood a little girl with chestnut pigtails, holding his hand and clutching a crumpled tissue. The man's expression wasn't pity, it was resolve. Something quiet, firm, luminous with purpose. He stepped into the aisle, ignoring the shocked gasps around him, and the little girl followed, staring at Grace with the wide-eyed innocence of someone who saw not what she lacked, but who she was. His name was Ethan Carter, a single father, a mechanic, and a man who understood heartbreak in a way few people did. He had lost his wife 5 years earlier to an illness that took her quickly and mercilessly, leaving him alone with a 2-year-old daughter and a grief that nearly swallowed him whole. He had come to the wedding as a distant co-worker of Daniel's cousin, only there because his little girl had begged to see a real princess bride. He hadn't expected to witness a tragedy instead. But when he saw Grace, her trembling hands, the crushed roses at her feet, the humiliation in her eyes, something in him stirred that he hadn't felt in years. A need to protect, to comfort, to step forward when everyone else stepped back. Grace didn't understand what was happening when Ethan approached. The guest parted around him like water. He knelt before her, bringing himself to eye level with her seated frame, and simply offered his hand. Not romantically, not dramatically, but humanly, meaningfully. A gesture that said, "You don't have to face this pain alone." Grace hesitated, stunned by the sincerity in his expression. And when she placed her trembling fingers in his, something warm flickered deep in her chest, a spark she thought she had lost forever. Ethan didn't lead her toward an altar. He led her toward dignity, toward the church's quiet garden, away from the prying eyes and the whispers. His daughter, Lily, followed them like a little sunbeam, offering Grace a small white rose she had picked from a bush, as if sensing she needed something gentle to hold. Grace's mother joined them, eyes still brimming with tears, but her face softened when she saw Grace's hand resting securely in Ethan's. It was as though this stranger had become her anchor in the very moment she began to drown. Outside, the world felt different. The wind nudged the leaves softly, birds chirped as if unaware of human heartbreak, and slowly, as Ethan guided her into the shade of an old oak tree, Grace felt the crushing weight inside her loosen just enough for her to breathe again. She didn't know why he had stepped forward. She didn't know him at all, but his presence grounded her. He was calm, steady, offering strength without words. Lily sat beside Grace's wheelchair, swinging her legs and humming a tune that sounded like hope. And for the first time since hearing the horrific truth, Grace didn't feel invisible or broken. She felt seen. As the minutes passed, Ethan shared with her, still without dialogue, something of his own loss, his struggles as a single father, the nights he lay awake fearing he wasn't enough for his little girl. He didn't speak to overshadow her pain, but to let her know that brokenness didn't make someone unworthy of love or life. And somehow, even without formal conversation, Grace understood him. Their shared tragedies created a silent language between them. When Grace finally returned to her home that evening, the wedding dress folded carefully in her lap, she assumed she would never see Ethan again. But he returned the next day, with Lily holding a handmade card that read, "Princess Grace, feel better soon." And that simple gesture became the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. Days turned to weeks. Ethan began stopping by after work, sometimes bringing Lily, sometimes bringing dinner he'd cooked himself. Grace found herself looking forward to the sound of his truck rumbling up her driveway. He treated her not like a fragile survivor or a tragic figure, but like a woman of strength, beauty, and worth. She found herself rediscovering pieces of who she used to be, her laughter, her love of painting, her hope, and Ethan, slowly but surely, rediscovered parts of himself too. The capacity to love again, to care deeply, to let someone close. Grace's healing wasn't linear. There were days she cried, days she felt abandoned all over again, and days she didn't want to get out of bed. But Ethan never withdrew. When Grace doubted her future, he showed her ways she could still create one. When she felt weak, he helped her see her own strength. And Lily adopted her instantly, as though fate had always meant for them to find one another. Eventually, rumors spread through town. Some whispered that Ethan was trying to save Grace. Others said she was relying too much on him. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the quiet joy that bloomed between them, the gentle comfort of shared wounds healing side by side, the unexpected beauty of two lives intertwining. One evening, nearly 6 months after the disastrous wedding, Grace joined Ethan and Lily for a local fall festival. The air smelled of cinnamon and hay, lights twinkling across the fairgrounds like stars. Ethan wheeled her beside him, their hands occasionally brushing. They watched Lily delight in pumpkin painting and funnel cakes, her laughter contagious. And at some point, as they stood near a bonfire, Grace looked up at Ethan and saw not the pain of her past reflected in his eyes, but the possibility of a new beginning. She realized then that love didn't always arrive in perfect packages or grand gestures. Sometimes it stepped forward quietly in a church full of strangers and offered its hand. Nearly a year after the wedding that never happened, Grace found herself in another white dress, simpler, softer, flowing around her like a whisper of resilience. She sat beneath a willow tree in a small outdoor ceremony where only close friends and family gathered. Lily joyfully sprinkling wildflower petals, played the role of flower girl with pride. And Ethan, with tears glimmering in his eyes, stood waiting for her, not at an altar of pressure or expectation, but at a place built from healing, kindness, and second chances.